And I guess I'll go next here. Um, I'm covering a series that I think caught some eyes. I'm not sure how many eyes that it caught, but I thought I would be taking a bullet for this series when initially when we initially covered it in the previews. It is called My Home Hero. So that's again the same name as it is in Japanese and English. It is supposed to be sort of like a drama mystery thriller, manga original, I believe, and it is produced by Tesca Productions. And I guess part of why I asked near whether it was like animation CG or whoever was because actually uh, Biburi Animation CG as well as Element Factory, two very standard people studios slash departments who do 3D CG for a lot of stuff for a lot of anime series, are actually working with Tesca Productions for this. So that's why I kind of asked. But yeah, it's an anime adaptation mainly by Tesca Productions. They had some help with production in various areas from like some Chinese companies as well, mainly a company called apparently Beijing Shile Art Company Limited. So they had some help from that, and you'll see some names related to that in the staff role as well. And again, they had 3D help from the standard places in Peabody Element Factory. They, you'll see them in a bunch of other series that use 3D as well. Original creator is pretty interesting because it's Yamakawa Naoki, who is also the creator of that one isekai series, I'm Standing on a Million Lives, which I heard was somewhat unique. So I have not read that yet, but I think Toast reviewed that and was okay with it, right? I think Toast, you were okay with that series, but I unfortunately have not gone through it yet. Director is Kame Takashi, who did. This is his first full directorial role after doing like this one weird like net animation, which is like with Polygon Pictures, which is like Transformers War for part of the Transformers War on Cybertron trilogy. So other than that sort of like weird net animation, this is actually his first full directorial role on a television public air broadcast anime. So um another interesting part, and this is like really weird. The script slash series composition for this series is Kyasu Kohei. And for those of you who don't know that is the voice actor of Ippo in Hajime no Ippo, as well as Kaido Kaoru in Prince of Tennis. So he's recently been trying to branch out into doing like other anime related things. He previously had took on the script slash series composition role for Run with the Wind, which was that like boys jogging team, whatever. Sorry, cross country team kind of thing series, which I think I reviewed, and I thought it was a pretty decent, pretty realistic series overall. So I'm glad that he's again branching out to doing other things. Although I do want to say that having your first series be about like boys jogging and doing cross country, and then having a second one being about like a murder mystery kind of thing or like murder thriller is very like you're branching out quite like in interesting ways there. So good on him for trying, obviously. Um, but very interesting person behind it. Um, Music, Kawai Kenji doing the music. I don't think I need to introduce him. I don't think I need to introduce him. So, and then the rest of like the cast, the staff, like the animation director and the general like visual design team, is generally cobbled together from Tezuka Productions related connections, previous series, as well as again from the Chinese companies that they subcontracted. So that's sort of how it goes. Again, I think they had a pretty good team overall, and you'll see kind of that pan out in my review. The opening ending, the ending is pretty vanilla. It's kind of standard for these, for most anime. But the opening, Ai no Uta, Chiaki Fuchikawa or Fujika Chiaki, it does focus a little bit more on the lyrics and kind of just like the raw singing, but I do like it quite a lot. The visuals for the opening are pretty good as well. So, thumbs up on that. I do like the opening a lot. The As for the voice acting cast, it's Suabe Junichi, Otsuka Akio, Kento Ito, Ohara Sayaka, and Okubo Rumi kind of heading a pretty decent voice acting cast. So, some pretty good star power there. And I especially think that Suabe Junichi here does a very, very good job of voice acting the main sort of panicked, I'm just a weak regular salary man who's just kind of doing this main character role, while also still doing like sort of personality shift changes or like taking a stronger tone when he needs to. So obviously, props to Soviet Junichi on that. Overall, I think before I go into the story, just a last note on the audio visuals. I think the animation that's put in here are unfortunately not particularly impressive. I don't think that's necessarily a mark really on Tesca Productions, but it's like this series, most of it's not like really bad animation, but it's also like most of the scenes are people just talking in place or maybe like holding something, holding an item or like shaking hands or whatever. So there's not really or require and most of this is just like regular Japanese cityscape, right? Urban landscape. So there are not very many requirements on the animators. This is about as close as you can get to essentially still shots without it going into full like way of the house husband O&A kind of specials. I'm not even kidding. It's pretty much like 99% talking and like being in bars and like stuff like that. So um I don't think there was really like that big of a hurdle, but overall, there's nothing fancy. I wasn't like very impressed by it or whatever, but it was serviceable. But yeah. Anyways, on to the story. A little bit of preface for this. Longtime viewers of this podcast will know I have biases towards different genres, as does most people who watch anime or any kind of fictional media,
Consume
right?
media.
Yeah, consume medium, and especially people who have strong opinions, such as myself. Else, I wouldn't have started this podcast, right? Um, so when I usually hear about series like this, right, that get into like contrived mystery thriller, like avoid whatever stuff like that, murder, whatever, I tend to have a negative bias against it because it usually kind of ends up being like forced cliffhanger after cliffhanger in each episode, and it's always like miraculous twist of fate where like at the last minute the villain stepped away from the door, and it's just like okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Or it's like coincidence where it's like, oh, the dentist was actually your a secret cousin twice removed who's actually also a mafia boss, and it's like, eh. So my bias coming into this was a little bit um negative. That's not to say I don't enjoy a lot of them as guilty pleasures, right? I enjoyed reading through the Da Vinci Code. I'm not going to say that the Da Vinci Code was good. I just enjoyed reading through, uh, should I say Robert Langdon is like airport rag? Would you say that that's a thing?
I I think that's fair, to be honest.
Yeah, at this point, yeah. So it's like I enjoy reading degenerate shit like that. The stuff like maybe you would find at a secondhand bookstore, right? But um, I don't have an overall super favorable attitude towards. It. So that's how I went into this series, and I'm gonna be perfectly honest about that. But I was actually very pleasantly surprised. Um, about how this went. Oh, yeah. I should probably just really quickly cover how the beginning setup of this series. So you have this ordinary guy, Tetsutosu. You don't really need to memorize his name. Nobody does. So there, you have this ordinary guy. He's father, or he has wife and daughter at home, or like daughter lives outside or whatever. Um, and he finds out that his um, daughter has been physically abused by her boyfriend, who is kind of like a classic, who seems on the surface like a classic like thug, just like whatever kind of no good person, and he has connections to like the yakuza, and he's like a bad person, and so then he accidentally also finds out that this thug is trying to extort money from his daughter and like kind of abuse her some more. So in a fit of panic slash rage slash whatever kind of at that moment, he ups and kills his daughter's boyfriend, the thug. And that obviously sets off a chain of events where, because that thug is connected to the like this crime syndicate, as well as a person, he is also the son of a person within the crime syndicate. That thug is the son of somebody within, very important within the crime syndicate, who is willing to pay money to find his now murdered son, right? Now he is on the run and he has to prevent the crime syndicate from, pulling a bullet, putting a bullet in his head, and kind of get out in any way possible. But obviously, since he's a weak, kind of regular salary man, he can't really do much, right? He's not Jason Bourne. He can't use his physical skills. He can't outrun people. He can't just use money or whatever. He doesn't have really connections. And obviously, his daughter and his wife can't run away from home with him forever, right? So what he does is essentially he uses the gift of gab, his talking skills, his ingenuity, his dialogue to get himself out of trouble. And his kind of end goal objective is to, again, uh, prevent the crime syndicate from killing him and kind of make up excuses and kind of cover up the fact that he murdered this guy. So that kind of unfolds. And alongside that plot is sort of the development of all the side casts. Obviously, other guy in the post art, who's also part of the crime syndicate, who was originally hunting him, but is now kind of like next to him and kind of working against him at times, but also kind of working with him for some stuff. And then sometime obviously the father of the murdered thug starts coming into the story more and more, and that's that sort of development. So there's a lot of character development within the story. So that's sort of how it goes. Again, the main core of the story is the fact that this MC murdered his uh girlfriend's, or sorry, murdered his daughter's thug boyfriend. And now, since that thug boyfriend was part of the crime syndicate, he now has to, cover it up. But again, there's going to be side character developments. So, and obviously, there's this like large kind of overarching theme of family, or like how would you act for your family, or like is this the right thing to do, stuff like that involved within it. So yeah, that's sort of the main core of the series. And the structure is generally, it's not episodic. It kind of, there are different things within each, major things within each episode, but obviously um it's ongoing, continual, kind of like this one thing happens and the next thing um he has to cover up kind of happens. And most of it's kind of focused on him making one excuse and getting into another, and escaping one trap only to fall into another trap, and him making, thinking of something to say dialogue wise to get him out, and out of the frying pan, and then back into another fire, right? So that's sort of how it's structured. It's like an ongoing thing, but there are constant like hurdles that he has to jump by using dialogue and his quick wits to get out. And thankfully, um he's able to think up of a lot more of these things, because he's like a huge um drama slash mystery nerd. He's like a mystery thriller nerd, and he reads up on a lot of these things. And I believe he is like an amateur like author, like web novelist on like mystery thriller novels online, while obviously also being a regular salary man. So he kind of uses that nerd knowledge, that otaku knowledge, to get himself out of trouble. So yeah, that's the core story. Now, as for my general thoughts into it, again, I kind of went into this series with a more negative bias, but I ended up being hooked on it quite a bit. And I was kind of overwhelmed by the sort of really well done, well paced atmospheric tension that it kind of just like put on my, just like choked me with. And I haven't had that feeling in a long time with a lot of these series, where again, my initial thought is like, okay, this is just another cliffhanger, this is just another contrived mechanic, stuff like that. So I was trying to dissect in my head why I was feeling this way about this series, as opposed to a bunch of the other stuff. And a couple of points is like, one, this series puts an extreme emphasis on the significant differences in power. So what I mean by that is like um or power and as well as like ingenuity, right? So what I mean by that is this it is extremely important to the advancement and the working of the story that the main character is a weak, regular salaryman who can do exactly nothing against this crime syndicate that's been kidnapping him, that's been threatening him at gunpoint, at knife point, whatever. He can't do anything except gab, except except use his mouth, blabber on. He has to use dialogue to get out of all of his traps, and that's the point of the story. So it's like playing those RPGs or like visual novels, right? Where it's like you have to pick the route, right? Like just with like dialogue or like choose your own adventure thing or like dialogue heavy RPGs, right? It's kind of like that, or um, kind of reminds me in horror games where you can't really attack or like deter the monster in front of you, right? Whenever you see a monster, you have to run. Um, it kind of reminds me of horror games like that, and obviously those things are scary. Those types of horror games are scary for a reason, right? When you have a BFG where you have a super big gun or whatever, um, in a horror movie or sorry, in a horror game or whatever, you're definitely not as scared as horror game where you just have to run for your life. If you have nothing, if you have nothing but a lamp, if you get caught, you die. Those games are definitely scary because you are powerless. And this series really emphasizes that and the feeling of the MC, the main character, being powerless. And I think that's a really good way to kind of layer on the atmospheric tension. And he's not able to, again, Jason Bourne, run everywhere, um, just dodge, jump out of windows. He's not able to suddenly turn like the most, other than the most basic actions or like the most obvious, like pick up object, drop object kind of thing. He can't do anything physical. So he has to think about this. But also, while some of his like ingenuity, some of his like, so a decent amount of the story is also advanced by the fact that he like kind of plans ahead and creates these more like intricate plans um to fool the crime syndicate, right? Like he'll create fake evidence or like he'll hack onto somebody's account to fool the crime syndicate into thinking that this guy is like actually saying things on his social media account when he's not, or something like that, right? So he'll plan out these things in advance, and part of that's pretty well justified by the fact that again he's a mystery slash thriller novel nerd, right? So he kind of waves it off as I've read a lot of these mystery thriller novels, so I I've seen some of this and I can kind of plan out more of these intricate things in my head, right? And I kind of know the script to say. And he literally gives his wife, who becomes an accomplice, these scripts to read during important scenes in order to fool the crime syndicate into thinking that, or sorry, the yakuza, right, into thinking that they're innocent or whatever, or to lead them on a wild goose hunt. So part of this ingenuity in this series is justified by that. Whereas in a lot of other series, right, you just have kind of the main character being like, oh, I did this, and then I thought like 50 steps in advance to put the crystal in here and then put the recording camera in there, and then but I knew that you had the security cam pointed at me, so I kind of said something in advance, and then I knew that blah 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 blah, and like they just kind of magically think all these things out because they're a genius, right? But even when he in this series, even when the MC is thinking about more and more intricate plans, um, you can kind of see the limitations where it's like he plans out intricate plans, but it's like only two, maybe three steps ish ahead. Usually one step ahead, right? And then the series kind of puts in these points where he kind of has to um survive by pure luck, right? He just has to make sure the villain doesn't notice him, or he does has to make sure the yakuza people don't like pull that lever or like open that door or whatever it is, right? So there are some of these points, and obviously we know as readers because we're not, or as watchers because we're not stupid, that the main character is going to survive, right? We know that the main character is going to survive of these 12 episodes and not, episode 5, the Yakuza guy opens the door and shoots him in the head. That's not going to happen. Oops, bad Ed, sorry. We know that's not going to happen. But it's still a good layer of suspense to add where it's like, there's some the plan is relatively simple. It's not like a genius, like 50 steps ahead kind of thing. And some parts, it's luck. It's luck. Plot armor, obviously, but it's luck. So that sort of thing gives it a more organic nature to the plans that the main character sets. So I do like that aspect of it, where it's like a mixture of that sort of simpler intricacy, as much of an oxymoron as phrase as it sounds, as well as kind of like the dumb luck part. Um, so I do like the um again, there is a little bit of a setup with regards to like, again, the thug and the killing, and like, oh, now the entire yakuza is on his ass and whatever it is, and that's like a bit of a setup. But I don't think even that's so much as bad. Because a lot of those motivations are explained even just like at the beginning as well as later on by um the various characters in the cast, again, like the murder thug's dad's motivation. So another thing that this series does that's usually not done as much in other series, another thriller, mystery, or like brain morality series, is that they front load a decent amount of the side cast character development. So it's like, again, like the murdered thug's dad's motivation. Why is the crime syndicate? Why are the yakuza out to get him so desperately, or out to get the main character so desperately for killing the thug? Well, they explain it in the first couple of episodes because this dad is like, well, I don't know where my kid is. We need to freaking find him. Has he been murdered? He's missing. What's happening to him? So that's explained up front rather than it being like the crime syndicate has done like a bunch of things, and then episode 10 it's like the Thanos comes out and it's like, oh, I did this for the greater, or whatever it is, right? It's not just saved for the climax because whatever, great morality. A lot of it's front loaded. The character development comes early, hot, steaming fresh, and I do like that sort of more unique setup. But also, there's honestly less railroading and just like arbitrary setups in the initial premise of the story than there is for some of the sort of later on motivations for the antagonist or the deuteragonist in the later episode. I would say some of the stuff that comes in later, again, episodes 3 with his sort of quote unquote partner Kyoichi, again, the phone holding guy on the side, um, and a lot of these other guys is just like, I would say they're honestly more railroaded than um even again the initial premises. So I think the overall setup is quite okay, which is again something I don't necessarily say for a lot of thrillers. And sort of going back to the tension part, right? What I was talking about when I was making the analog between My Home Hero and like a horror game, right? Or like a dialogue based RPG game, right? Where you just have to talk your way out of something like, maybe something like Disco Elysium, right? Where you have to like make these like dialogue choices constantly. Obviously, you have like small actions, but most of it's dialogue, right? So although the series has one story, the plot has like one path that we know it's going to go, right? We don't know exactly where it's going to go, but we know it's going to go a certain path, right? The way it creates the tension, even though we know that some of the things are constant, like the male characters are constant and stuff, like the main character surviving is constant and stuff like that. Um, it keeps making it feel like there's some sort of alternate bad end, because I'm not sure why I feel this psychologically, but I feel like maybe that's a side effect of the fact that they front loaded a lot of the shocking scenes in the first few episodes. So usually, what happens with a lot of mystery thrillers, right? Is like as they build up to the climax, as the main character gets closer to the how do I say it? Sort of the core of the problem, right? There's more and more and more violence building up, right? And a lot of this is the most like emblematic kind of stuff is something like Trigger series, right? Or like Gain X kind of series where it's like
Yeah.
more and more the closer you get to climax, the more explosions there are. And like at the climax, like the entire universe blows up, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like that. Um, this series front loaded a lot of the violence and kidnapping or whatever at the beginning, like when they were getting roughed up and like when the guy initially has to settle things with the kind of initially fend off the wave of the yakuza coming at him, and then the later episodes are all kind of dialogue. Obvious, so it's just like it kind of feels like oh he's using the dialogue to stave off more of the actual violence that I saw in the previous episodes. So it kind of feels like there could very well be violence, viewer, if you saw it in the earlier episodes, but he's only barely holding it back at bay by talking his way. So it all kind of that I think that increases attention by providing this obvious precedent of a bad end that has been shown before. So it kind of feels like it's more iffy than it actually seems. So again, I do like that structure, and the pacing I think is very very good as well. Just I definitely wasn't expecting the pacing and like the way it set up its tension to be so well done, but it is how it is. And I don't really like this sort of genre to begin with, but I was surprised by how I got sucked into it. Excuse me, sorry. All of again, most of it like people are threatening violence and doing a bunch of dangerous stuff on the side, but most of like the core story is just like talking and dialogue. So um, does have the unfortunate side effect of making it feel like some like the kidnappings and brute force and violence and stuff like that are railroaded. Although obviously, it's yakuza stuff, right? There's got to be some violence or some like force or whatever, brute force or whatever. But it kind of does feel like some of the spurts are like, oh, like we need you to feel dangerous, so here's some violence. So it kind of does feel like that, but I understand like why they put it in, right? That's like an actual thing. So that's just my feeling on that sort of balance between the dialogue and the violence or slash action. But it is 90% dialogue, so it is an interesting way to do the mystery thriller for sure. Um, Again, going back to the family theme, all the sort of central characters reference connections to their families in some way as part of their personalities, as it relates to the current story, or their sort of driving motivation for doing, certain act or taking certain actions in the story. And while that is nice, family meme and all that. Some of that stuff is quite on the nose. Um, I think there most of it's organic. Like there's talks with the murder thug's other girlfriend about like parents and children. That talk was nice. Um, Again, going back to the murdered thug's dad's motivations and why that dad sent the entire yakuza to get the main character. That sort of motivation, I think, is well put. But there are other times where it's like people will just be like, "Oh, my mom, oh, family," and it's like, that's I think a little bit too much on. But again, that's a very small, um, not even like a gripe I have, just like something I thought it was a little bit on the nose. But yeah, again, pacing is fabulous. I think there are a lot of unique, subtle, not unique, but very uncommon, subtle story structure differences in between this and a lot of other thriller mystery series that other writers could take an example, a leaf out of the book of. Um, the build of the characters are also like kind of developing in parallel, like switching between different characters, and it's piecemeal here and there. There's decent amount of front loading instead of like just only the baddie coming out and being like, "Do you know why I did this bad thing? Because it was for the greater good, or like because I had to sacrifice everything for my son, or whatever it is." Obviously, there are strains of that in the core development, but I think the writer does a very good job in portraying and scaling the extreme decisions of that story alongside the extreme emotions. And what I mean by that is like um an example in the story is like why you so it's like the thug's dad gets asked like why like like how would you act if your son was like if something really bad happened to your son like he was injured or even killed, right? And the thug's dad obviously, like how natural real life people would say, he'd be like, I'd fucking go berserk, right? I would probably try to kill the person who killed my son, right? And that's like a natural thing to say as like a family member, right?
Yeah.
um so that's like the motivation for the thug's dad sicking the yakuza on the main character. And if you, as the viewer, it kind of feels like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is like a relatively like local thing, although it does involve the yakuza slash mafia slash crime syndicate, right? Although it does involve the yakuza, it seems like a very local, personal, organic kind of thing because they have a naturally every reason to be angry for their son going missing or potentially even being killed or whatever, right? And that's a difference between that and like a story where the premise is, oh, my son went missing. I'm going to blow up this entire city block. It's like what? Like those stories like that, right? Where like
Yeah.
I destroyed the universe because I was I couldn't stand a world where my son was not treated equally or whatever it is, right? Or some bullshit like that. Like there are plenty of stories like that where the emotions and the kind of thing that you would think as a human being or as like a organic human being within the realms of what we can understand, right? Um, in a story compared to the actions that the antagonists take are so like out of bound with each other, right? It's almost like it's like trying to take it's like trying to take John Wick unironically, or like lore or like the motivations very like seriously, right? Where it's like, oh, he loved his wife so much, he actually just like wanted to kill everybody with like guns and a pencil, right? It's like is that really in scale with like with your emotions? So I think this series did a very good job of keeping that sort of scaling. I guess that's the word I want to use. The scaling of the decisions that they take compared to the emotions very real. Like they have that motivation to want to kill this dude, kill the main character, or like beat up the main character because the freaking guy killed his son. So it's like it's very organic in that way. I really do like that sort of setting. Um, and I know I'm kind of like splurging over like again like how sort of all the different structures, but also like for some reason there's more exploration right now of like the villains' lives and like how the characteristics are than there is of the main character, which is like a funny slash interesting way to develop things, right? Because like it makes sense because it makes the villains not 2D very quickly, which makes the interactions that more tense, that more like organic, and makes you think more. um, but it's definitely not something that you see as much, right? Usually you kind of see the villains kind of do whatever. They're relatively 2D, while the main character gets all the development until you hit sort of the climax or get close to the climax, and then you kind of wade into the villain's backstory. That's sort of how it works, right? But there's definitely a lot of early exploration of like why the villains are thinking this way, why the baddies that are chasing the main character are uh, thinking this way. And the story also tries to kind of make it so that it's not necessarily the case that the main character is in the right from the beginning. So it's not like a case of, oh, the main character ultimately dirties his hands to do the right thing or for the greater good. And so like how much does he have to sacrifice for the greater good? It's not really even that sort of focus. It's like the focus is he just might have fucked up from the start. By
Yeah, I
murdering
mean,
that dude, he
he
might have
he
just
he
fucked
fucking
up.
killed someone, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. He killed somebody's son. And that's sort of how it's done. And it's not like in a lot of other series it would be like some baddie is just out to kill his daughter or like to fuck his daughter, like rape his daughter, and he just killed him. Now he's on the run, which would be like a very standard kind of thriller series, right? And it would be like, yeah, okay, the villains did bad things, and now how much are you going to become a murderer, or how bad things? That's a very like gray morality weighing the stuff like that, right? Like how much are you willing to go for family? Blah 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 blah. Blah. But this at the from the beginning, the MC might actually be one of the bad guys. So I think that's a very good, interesting way to frame it for sure. And that's like it's still like the whole like gray morality kind of thing, right? But it's a very good variant. It's a very good way to structure the setup. So yeah.
What would you rate it?
But yeah, I just I definitely didn't expect it to be like this. I think I would honestly have to rate it an 8 for sure. Like, and again, I don't really like these types of series, and I'm not sure if I could be like, wow, this is totally the type of series I would get into. But it just magically did suck me in. The -2, I think, would be from. I think obviously the visuals could be a little bit more impressive, even if it is static. Mostly just like people talking. Maybe I don't know what it could be added, but it's like I feel like there could be more to the visuals. Also, I wasn't like very convinced with like the obviously the maybe the ED stuff like that. But other than those like small details, I think most everything was pretty on point and just like a very unique mystery thriller that really did suck me in. And just like noticing all these different story structures really fascinated me. So sorry for going on such like a big like rant, but I was just very surprised. This would definitely get my end of the year surprise or end of the year like most pleasant surprise award, I think, hands down, unless something else miraculous comes. So definitely at least an 8 out of 10, I think. So this was My Home Hero by Tesca Productions. It is a manga original, and I just, again, if you like a mystery thriller that has a very unique sort of story structure, please do check it out. So yeah.